Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you. Thank you for coming. And a special warm welcome to our three panelists on the scene, on the stage. But first of all, welcome to Jeannette Ehlers, who has been working very hard together with her team. In this room, we have Anushka, curator. We have Sarah Chevalier, curator. We have Elodie, communications officer. So lots of people, as well as on stage, of course, Elisa Durand, curator of the exhibition, co-curator, and our also new, very special guest, teacher at the Sorbonne, professor at the Sorbonne, and I just want to say your name correctly, Elvan Zabunyan. As I was trying to say, it was a fantastic evening last night, and we are all so pleased about your exhibition, of course. We feel very honored that we are able to sort of continue the dialogue that actually I feel we started many years ago. Because the little story behind is that I used to be director of the Karen Blixen Museum in Rungsted for 10 years, and that was then we met, and we started out reflecting on those topics, those issues. At the same time, of course, the post-colonial agenda, which is very strong, of course, in this exhibition, but also in Karen Blixen's writing. To this extent, we have been imagining a talk next week about post-colonialism and Karen Blixen in this very exhibition. So thank you also for giving us this opportunity, which we've taken with great pleasure. The three of you, you know each other, but I just learned that you, Elvan, and you, Elisa, you don't really know each other, but you know each other from common friends and scholars. So it's going to be really interesting to hear your discussion with Jeannette about what this exhibition is all about and about how Jeannette works, and also what is the future of this kind of work. I would personally think that that would be a very interesting topic to place it into a historical context. So thank you very much, and let us welcome the three guests on the stage. Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
So welcome to this art talk with Jeannette Ehlers, and it doesn't work anymore. Can you hear me? Okay. So welcome to this art talk with Jeannette Ehlers and Elvan Zabunyan at Le Bicolore, Maison du Danemark. And welcome to the exhibition. We are so glad to see you, all of you. My name is Elisa Leïla Durand, and I created Jeannette's exhibition here. I'm French, so during the talk, if anything is unclear, just let me know. I'm happy to welcome you in this discussion when we'll be exploring Jeannette Ehlers' work from various perspectives, such as the diaspora, post-colonialism, and strategies to address coloniality within the arts. Jeannette, before we dive into the discussion, I would like to introduce you. So Jeannette Ehlers is a Trinidadian and Danish visual artist based in Copenhagen, Denmark. After graduating from the Royal Danish Academy of Arts, she spent time in Ghana, a journey that was not only profoundly transformative, but also a rite of passage that would shape her career. Following this trip, she dedicated her work to telling colonial and post-colonial stories, addressing both Denmark's history and thus infused with her heritage from Trinidad and Tobago. For several years, she has continued to find answers and narratives linked to her history through encounters and collaborations, extending her artistic research to an international and diasporic scale. Then, her approach to history transcends maternal lines and time and is essential to express what needs to be said. It is intersectional, diasporic, and cyclical. Dealing with visibility, disappearing, and collective memory, Jeannette Ehlers' current exhibition at Le Bicolore is an invitation to reflect upon memory and resilience. In her exhibition here, by highlighting the ongoing impact of European colonialism, Jeannette Ehlers takes us on a deep dive into the collective memory of the Caribbean, its fragmentation, and its reconstitution. Furthermore, she brings together several narratives and personal stories, encompassing both the intimate and the political. Now I would like to introduce our second guest, Elvan Zabunyan. So Elvan Zabunyan is a contemporary art historian, professor of contemporary art history at Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne University, and art critic. She is renowned for her work with an intersectional approach to race, gender, and post-colonial dynamics. Her work has focused for over 25 years on racial, post-colonial, and feminist issues in art during the 20th and 21st centuries. Therefore, she has co-directed several books and written numerous articles for collective anthologies, international exhibition catalogues, and academic journals. For 2018 to 2021, she coordinated the working group Artists and Citizens for the European programs ECOS, European Colonial Heritage Modalities in the Integrated Cities. It was correct, yeah. This program acknowledges that while the history of empires and colonialism undoubtedly constitutes a shared European past, this past remains conspicuously absent in official narratives about Europe's heritage. She is also member of the editorial committee for the journal Esclavage et post-esclavage, Slaveries and Post-Slaveries, published by the International Research Center on Slaveries and Post-Slaveries. In 2024, she is a visiting professor at the University of Zurich and teaches in the art history in the global context program. Demonstrating how contemporary art addresses issues of the slave trade and slavery, particularly in the United States and the Caribbean, her work contributes to the understanding of representation in visual arts, performance, body arts, and the history of African American music. Her research on the history of transatlantic slavery in contemporary arts in the United States and the Caribbean will be published in Réunir les bouts du monde, art, histoire, esclavage en mémoire. I tried to do the English translation, Gathering the Hands of the Words, Art, History, Slavery in Memory. Yes, will be published in September 2024 at B42 Publishing House. So this book promises to be a comprehensive extension of her previous work, particularly her book Black is a Color, Une histoire de l'art africain-américain, Black is a Color, An History of African American Art, published at D'Ivoire in 2004 and 2005 for the English version. So that work had already marked a milestone in the study of African American art by integrating racial and post-colonial perspectives into the analysis of contemporary art. So, during this talk, drawing on the work of Jeannette Ehlers and her exhibition at Le Bicolore, I would like to discuss with you matters of time and space, but also representation in your practice. In relation to coloniality and post-colonial, I would also like us to discuss decolonial approaches, postures, and the methodological dialogue that inspire Jeannette Ehlers' artistic practice, as well as from a more academic perspective and in terms of history with Elvan Zabunyan. So, Elvan, when we had our first conversation, you mentioned Jeannette's video piece, Black Bullets, recorded at the Citadel in Haiti in 2012. So here in the screen, and I will start in a few seconds. I started now. So up, 1 second. So it's starting, yeah. So to start, Elvan, could you maybe elaborate on why this piece resonates with you and resonated with you before?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation, Elisa and Jeannette. It is a great pleasure to be here with you both and to have this moment. linked to your work. And so, yes, I think it's interesting to start with this piece, which is also in connection with the exhibition in a way, because it's a video piece. And I had the chance to see it at the ICA in Boston, in the context of an exhibition which was on Caribbean diasporic art. And it was presented. I liked very much the silence of the piece, which was also a moment in the exhibition where you could really be absorbed, and it was really like you were hypnotized in a way with the loop. I think interesting to think about the loop in a video. In video art in general. And I think that Jeannette Ehlers' way to play, let's say it called like this, the loop, is also the possibility to show how these bodies move together, but at the same time they are completely fragmented. And what is fragmentation, you know, in history, in representation, what is a fragmented body? And I have the impression that the moment when the body disappears into this sky, you know, but it looks also that it disappears into the water. And so you have a mix of several impressions on the way this body enters a space, an unknown space, and this disappearance, and then suddenly you feel that the bodies come back, and then you feel better when they come back, you know. So the moment when they disappear, you have, and I stayed very long in front of this video, and of course I didn't know anything about that 2024 will be. This was in January, the moment when I will meet Jeannette in person, because I know her work for a quite long time now, and so yeah, this work is very poetic and is also very much linked to my way of understanding representation of memory, of the death, of the transatlantic slave trade, of what it is to be in a place where you don't want to be. And at the same time, of course, when as an art historian and working on these questions of disappearance and also the memory of these people that were enslaved, I thought also right away there is a narrative with in the Sea Islands in the U.S., which is in the Georgia state. You have a place which is called Ibo Landing, and Ibo Landing was one of the places where a slave ship landed, and it is said that the enslaved men said to themselves, "We don't want to live this life as enslaved people," and so they say, the water brought us, and the water will bring us back. And so they decide to go into the water and to die into the water, and that their spirits will go back to Africa. And when I saw this piece, I suddenly had this feeling that it was this like the spirits, the beautiful spirits of these people, these enslaved people, they came there. But I know, and after that I read the caption and the label, and I understood that it was, you know, in Haiti, so it made also sense, which was Haiti was with Jamaica, where really like some of the worst places, you know, for the plantations and the work in the plantation. But at the same time, Haiti is also the first black republic in the world, because in 1804 you had after the Haitian Revolution, which followed exactly the French Revolution. It was 2 years after the French Revolution. The time they had the news with the boat, 1789, and then they received the news that they were the French Revolution, and they decided to make the Haitian Revolution. And so, yeah, this work is, for me, it's really, it was really nice to have this this experience, to experience this work in the context of this museum and this exhibition. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elvan. And talking about representation also in space, I would like to move on to another piece way more recent than that one. I would just go back on the laptop now.
While you're doing this, I just wanted to say thank you so much for a beautiful interpretation of this video piece. I really, really enjoyed listening to you. And I also wanted to say that, yes, this is about the Haitian Revolution, and it's inspired by the French Revolution. It was a French colony. It was also inspired by voodoo, which is one of the things that I wanted to really emphasize. That's why it's so mesmerizing. You know, like, I think being in this trance, to really overcome the colonial power, you have to be in a trance, and that was the voodoo part of it. And then when they were inspired by the French Revolution, they were inspired by the égalité, whatever. Yeah. But of course, that was only meant for the white man. But they managed to do it. They managed to overthrow. So it was just a powerful, powerful event in history. And most people, especially in the West, only know about the French Revolution. A lot of people don't know about the Haitian Revolution, but they are so linked.
Of course, it's
and they are, and I think, you know, the Haitian Revolution is just as big as the French Revolution.
Yeah, sure. It is true, and also just to link it to the Vodou, the Haitian Revolution. I mean, all the main leaders, they were really practicing Vodou themselves. So it's like, and of course, Vodou is, you say voodoo or you say Santeria in Cuba, and you have different names for this religion, which is a religion, the way coming from Africa, Benin, and then the way they interpret this in the colonial and the context of the plantation. And so, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Thank you both of you. And so I would like to move to another piece. So when I was living in Copenhagen in 2020, the first work of yours I got familiar with was, like many people in Denmark, I Am Queen Mary. First time she was built in 2018. So I Am Queen Mary is this statue. It's a statue installed in Copenhagen public space. So this collaborative work you realized with Lavobel, an artist from the US Virgin Islands, represents one of the 4 queens who led the 1878 labor revolt in Sainte Croix, a former Danish colony. In 2020, the Danish government granted permission to permanently install I Am Queen Mary in front of a former colonial warehouse in Copenhagen. So I was very touched and moved by this sculpture in public space. Also, as it is the first monument of a black woman in Denmark, as rare it is in France. So in 2022, the Paris mayor inaugurated the Solitude statue, where we've been on Saturday along with Jeannette. Solitude statue is is an emblematic heroine of the fight against slavery in Guadeloupe, which is also the first statue of a black woman in Paris. I wanted to evoke Solitude and I Am Queen Mary, to ask you, Jeannette, regarding your relationship to public spaces and architecture. I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about how was it to work in a Parisian context and what it means to you to show your work in France.
I just want to start with the project I Am Queen Mary, because it's, as you mentioned, it's a public art project in Copenhagen, and it's the first of its kind, representing a black female body and resistance within public space. And the very, very unique thing about this project is, of course, that it's the first, but also that it's completely artist-driven. So it was not commissioned by anyone. It was me and Elvan Zabunyan who initiated this project, who have been fighting for making it permanent, and we're still fighting for it. It's not permanent yet, even though we got the permission, but we still haven't got the funding for it. So it's very, very difficult. So that's the big difference between Denmark, I Am Queen Mary and Solitude, French, because that was commissioned by, I guess, Paris or the government, I don't know. And also it was commissioned and it was made by a white male artist. And this is like the Queens made by 2 black female artists. So it's like, and we're fighting the colonial structures that they were fighting. Of course, their fight was harder, but it's still, I mean, it's the same thing in a way. Oh, okay. So, I mean, the structures are the same that we're fighting. So, so that those are the differences. But I was very, I don't know, I'm not pushing anything. I'm just okay. I was very surprised, and I mean, I've heard about Solitude before, but it was great to see it. And I'm just like, it was in the area of other sculptures that are marking, or I don't know, not celebrating, but memorials about the colonial history and slavery and all of that. So in that sense, I feel that France is much further ahead of confronting colonial history, or at least acknowledging colonial history and taking these issues up in public space, as Denmark is not really there yet. We're starting like small steps, also dealing with our relation to Greenland, which is the same history, and but there's a long way. And also, since we're still in this like limbo with the I Am Queen Mary, I mean, we're still fighting this, so it's very hard. But to show my work here in Paris, as you asked me for, I just feel it's amazing, because even though I guess there's also some kind of denial in confronting colonial issues in France, at least there's a huge diversity, and I mean, it's just so different from Denmark here. So there's a lot of issues that are really like coming out and like in the open in a way. It's just a different attitude and a different way of dealing with stuff here, I would say.
Yeah, thank you, Jeannette. And I don't know if maybe Elvan, you wanna like take the conversation on this also, relating to public, more as an art historian, what public spaces mean for colonial history and decolonial practices today, maybe shortly. I know it's a big question.
Thank you. Yes, this work by Jeannette. The first time I was in almost direct contact with it was at the time it was presented in 2018, because I was the European research program you mentioned in the presentation was actually initiated by Danish colleagues from the Aarhus University. And I was the leader of one work package, which was artists and citizens. And we had 3 cities, like Marseille, Bristol, and Cape Town. And but we were also looking for, important artistic examples, or like really like models to follow in the context of different cities. And of course, Copenhagen was one of the city, because my colleagues were Danish, and they were really interested in introducing post-colonial and decolonial methodologies into this history of colonial heritage. And so when at the moment when this work, and we were working in different public space in Marseille and in Cape Town, because the Road Must Fall event, which was also in Cape Town in 2015, linked to the demonstrations of students from the Cape Town University, linked to this like statue, which would of colonial famous political men, and so they wanted to, Rhodes must fall. So they did, like a lot of performance artists did a performance around this sculpture and this statue. So you had this, and also, of course, the work by Jeannette was a little bit before what happened in 2020 after George Floyd was murdered, and that a lot of like anti-racist demonstrations were global, at the global stage, were also taking part. And we had the work on decolonial or decolonizing colonial heritage in Bristol, and there it was like the Colston statue, which was also attacked by the demonstrators, and actually all these events, what was very important for me was that, as Jeannette, you just said, that it was like also artist driven. I mean, initiated by artists, and I think that it makes a difference when, I mean, even though you have a difficulty to make it stay there, or you have the authorization and not the money yet, and I hope you will have it, because it's a very interesting and beautiful work of art first. And so I think this is something which is very challenging today in any political context, when artists start to make a critique of colonial history, of any kind of discriminations, then it becomes a political tool, and then it can be disturbing. But at the moment it starts to be disturbing, then they try to stop the work of art. But you have always the free speech, you know, for an artist, or the free expression. And so it's kind of challenging also, because now, if they would take this piece away, they will be completely criticized as being like censoring artwork. So I think that this is the precise balance we try to have in this like European program. And actually Jeannette's work was really at the core of our discussions at that time. And it was really like, yes, you know, we're dealing with like artists and citizens and the way they speak about these decolonizing processes in politics, in arts, in history, and it was really like our iconic reference. And in the book we published, my colleagues, they are not art historians. I was the only art historian, and I had my postdoc, she was also an art historian, so the methodologies are completely different. They were just like, you know, looking at art in a different way. But my colleagues from political science and diplomacy and all this, they added Jeannette's work as the main image in their essay, in the book. So you're in the book.
That's wonderful. And yeah, I'm always very happy to hear when it resonates with people in the like real life. And I also just want to add one thing, and that is, I mean, we've had a lot of support from many people, and a lot of people want it there, and it's also gotten a lot of global attention. Of course, we also got a lot of pushbacks and a lot of criticism and stuff like that. But some of the criticism is the fact that it's figurative, because that's not something, you know, that is really like something you do at the moment, or like in this modernity. Of course, there are more and more sculptures in public space that represent someone. But it's a very, very important statement that it's figurative, because it's about representation, and there was no representation of black bodies in public space. So if we had made an abstract sculpture, it wouldn't have made the same impact. So it's very, very important that it's figurative.
Thank you for adding this. I think it's very important. And I would like to go more into the exhibition now at the Bicolore. So yeah, because I felt like here in your exhibition, Crossing Waters, Ripples of Tomorrow, first, as you saw it's an immersive show where the idea of time loops inside each work is quite present. So you are working at the same time with archive images and references, but also with some very contemporary themes, language and display. So in this exhibition, your piece coils the sensuous way of knowing, which is just above there of us. Comprises 16 smartphones playing footages in a loop of demonstrations, revolutions and fires breaking out during rioting, bearing witness to racist violence from the 60s to the present day. So this work also highlights how history is constructed in the West and is deeply rooted in the distribution of images that shape our perception of reality, as well as our imagination and narratives. So this is also why I wanted to ask you if you could tell us more about your relationship to time and history in your work, especially your cyclical approach to time, and what does it mean to you to use all references, different references, and to, as I say, like to have these cyclical approaches to time and history.
Yeah, it's true that that I work cyclical in a way, or across time, across waters. And actually, I wanted to start off with the I Am Queen Mary again, because, like I said, the structures that we are dealing with are the same structures that that Queen Mary and the other queens were dealing with, but in a different way. And actually, the bottom of the Queen Mary statue is our not charcoal. Hvad hedder det nu? From the ocean. Coral stones, and that was cut out of the ocean by enslaved Africans. So that is around slavery. Anyways, the figure of Queen Mary, she is inspired by Huey P. Newton, who was one of the founders of the Black Panther Party, who has an iconic photo of him sitting in a peacock chair with a rifle and a spear. So it's reaching out. It's not only Queen Mary. It's like reaching out to the whole diaspora and the struggle within the diaspora, across time, across space. And so that is really what this is about, you know. It's like the structures are the same. We're still struggling with these structures, but in transformed ways. And that is also why this piece that you are referring to over here, it has these snippets of demonstrations from the 60s up till today, and it's the same. The riots are started off from the same anger, I guess, from the same core root. And the video piece in the back is also struggling and fighting against this colonial system, but in a very subtle way, in a very hidden way, because this is about hair, and it's about how hairdos can be survival strategies, can have hidden messages inside of them as a way of resisting the colonial system, just like these are resisting the colonial system, but in a more open way. So it's all about, you know, it's like revolving around the same questions all the time, but in different ways and across histories and across continents, like we see in the. So it's the, I mean, for me, it's the colonial system that is the core, as well as the diaspora, and then it's just circling around that, and also within the Western way of seeing history is like a very timeline, like a very straight line, whereas in the African cosmologies it's more like a cyclic way, and that's also like, I mean, we are very much into honoring the ancestors, which this piece is also about, because it's inspired by a ceremony honoring the ancestors. So it's like more like cyclical way, and
Yes, thank you. And I think it's also very interesting to have your perspective, Elvan, on that relationship to time as an art historian, also to see time like as Jeannette used it as like it's like your first material to work with, history and archive and more contemporary image, and the way you use it and you display it in your works. But yes, Elvan, of course, you have like methods quite different, I guess, as a art historian, and maybe it would be interesting also for the audience here to have your perspective on that.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think I will just follow also Jeannette's steps, because my methodology as an art historian is really to go on the same side than the artist. So I find very interesting. Sometimes I'm always surprised to see how much what you say, for example, now resonates with I think as an art historian, and because to be on the same side. It's not to be on the same side of history, but to be on the same side of the gaze of the way you look at certain objects, certain narratives, certain history, certain archives, certain memory. And it's interesting, for example, in the upcoming book, it was completely a coincidence, or maybe there's no coincidence, when we made the tour of the exhibition, the visit, and I will come back because I'm not able to see it as I would like because of the display for this evening. You said that there is all these different elements like fire, air, and charcoal, yes, like earth and water. And actually, I have my 4th chapter in my upcoming book. They're also on the 4 elements. And on fire, of course, I have all this moment of the riots in the 60s, mainly in the 60s. But I start with the Haitian Revolution because they burnt everything first. And so the thing of the fire is also, and when you say like a call to the ancestors, water is also like a way to go back, and that's why I found interesting when we started with black bullets, but the question also of the riots, we could also say that it's a terminology, because we use riot, but it could be also revolt, and I prefer revolt than riot. In French, the difference is almost, because riot is like, it doesn't give the reason why people are becomes rioters, and revolt, then in the word itself you understand that there is something which has to be said. And then to link it with this silence of the hair, and what is the symbolic and the hidden symbolic of what the hair, because hair were and the hairdos were always also the possibility to resist, because you had like different codes in slavery times. You had the possibility, because usually, or even not with the hair itself, but also the way you would put like a handkerchief on your head, the way you will not. Everything had a silent code, a hidden code, because you were not able to speak during this time. And this is what I see also, and that's what very interesting is in the work Jeannette is doing, and that's why I feel so much like it resonates. And, it's not like I'm an art historian and I will look at it with the distance of an art historian. When you work on this history of slavery, on the colonial history, you have to deal with also everything which is not existing. And so you have to reveal a certain kind of thing. And archives, any kind of archive, could also help to reveal. But sometimes this archive, when you're a historian, I spoke with like historians of slavery. They're working on slavery, and they said, yeah, but you don't have the way we do as revealing facts or as dealing with facts. I said, yeah, but sometimes there is no facts. There's no proof. The history was not written from the point of view of the enslaved people. It was written from the point of view of the slavers. And so I said, for me, the artist is the one who is writing the history we don't know. And so as an art historian, I write the history thanks to this artist. So this is the way I think. So that's why it's so precious to have works like this, because it helps to understand not just it's not just an aesthetical experience. It's also like something which a new narrative which comes after this aesthetic experience. And you cannot how you say, separate these two experiences. They are really intertwined and entangled, and they're going together, I think. Yeah.
Wow, can I just add something? And I really appreciate your words. And also in relation to the histories and the written history, which is the one that is accepted and acknowledged, versus the histories that were not written, but they were still there. So they are like oral histories. They are bodily histories. They are bodily experiences passed down, which is why, being from the African diaspora, even though I might not have experienced the same thing as my ancestors, I still have that link and I still feel it, So it's like this, and it's so important, especially also when we talk about the archives, like the Royal Danish Archive, for instance, where they have all the material from the colonies, and that is accepted as real history writing, but they are not going to accept the oral histories from the Virgin Islands, for instance, because it's not written down. It doesn't have the same quality. So it's just so, within these structures, it's also like a structure or something that has been made up. It's like. I wanted to say something in particular, but I forgot the word. But anyways, it's a power structure.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that thanks to the artists, we have a completely other knowledge of this history, because they have the freedom to create a work of art, and so this work of art can be, read from different point of views. And then they reveal this hidden, and to come back to this oral history, it was also the same with all this in the colonial context or in the slavery context. People were not allowed to speak, to read, to learn how to write, so there were no traces left, no archive, nothing. And so the oral history was also the way to transmit an experience. In this experience, there were storytellers in a way, and the storytelling is so important. It is also a literary form in a way, the storytelling, but oral story. But people, they were not, and then this was also something I was interested in the research I've done. It's just like, how do you work? How do you write a history when you don't have any factual traces? And then that's why the artists, they just invent. This is creation. I mean, this is the base of creation. You just invent a trace. And this trace, because it exists in the space, and we can see it here, it becomes real. And then for us, art historian, then we can start to work. And maybe we can also speak. I don't know what was your next question, but I think it's interesting to speak about this simple image, which is really, it's even like a miracle that we have, miracle at the same time, is such a violent image of Anastasia. And then you have it is a drawing, no? Etching, yeah, yes. And then, so maybe this is interesting because you can tell, probably you have a question about it, but you will tell the story about that. But I find it so interesting because art is also about interpretation, how you visualize an image and what you do with your own, intellectual approaches, poetical approaches, political approaches. And I think that this is what we see in the space here today.
Yeah, really. Thank you. That's really what I wanted to talk about now. And yes, talking about representation and the way you're using images with time and how the archives can talk for nowadays. And you created a new piece recently, Jeannette. So there is, I already saw that in your work there is a lot of figures and historical figures that are dear to you. And I would like to come back to Anastasia. So the name of the piece is Anastasia, Ever Changing as the Ocean. That was produced at first for the Bicolore now, and will maybe move in other countries later. So this is a charcoal work, homage to esclava Anastasia, an enslaved woman of African descent born in 1740, who has become an important spiritual figure and a religious icon in Brazil. Anastasia and other figures you work with embody a way of dealing with disappearance and reappearance and reappropriation and appropriation. All of those themes like just intertwine also at the same time, especially in Anastasia. I will not tell now, maybe you can tell us about how she was appropriated and how her image was used in Brazil, but also more recently, as you know. So yeah, also maybe other characters or historical figures, if you would like. Yeah.
Sure. As you see on the image, this is actually a copy that I made in 2015 of the etching of this image of Anastasia. So this is a laser cut version of Anastasia. And Anastasia, she has, as you mentioned, she has become a saint in Brazil. And I don't know the details of her life or anything, but she was forced to wear this mask. As you already mentioned, enslaved people, everything is taken away and you are not allowed to do anything. But she was forced to wear this mask because she had resisted somehow. And that is, of course, a very brutal image of her. But it's also a very iconic image. And as I mentioned, she has become a saint. So I wanted to remake this because it has been shown in many different ways and it's been used and misused. And recently I read that during COVID, white feminists used her image to fight against the wearing of masks. So she has been really like misused in many ways, also from other people. I saw some, like back a few years ago, some fashion show had her on the printed on, something like that, So, but anyways, it doesn't take away the fact that she is also a saint. But now I've made this back in 2015, and for this show I made her in charcoal to represent, of course, her status as the saint, but also a representation of the colonial system. And I made it in charcoal because I feel that the cyclical movement we have in this exhibition is like, here we have all the fire in the street, the revolt, the rebellion, what did you say? Revolt, and all the fire. So I kind of see this as the reminiscence of the fire in the streets that creates this image of her. Because she was a fighter, she was resisting, but she was also really, like, of course, suppressed by the colonial system. So it's a way of making, like, starting afresh in a way and burning down the colonial system, but it's also a way of speaking about the colonial system. So it's like, it kind of is very linked to this piece. So, but of course, I just wanted to say that Queen Mary, her name was Mary Thomas. She lived in the Virgin Islands in St. Croix. She wasn't enslaved, but the fire burn that she was leading, they also burned down plantations. But that was a labor revolt, and I think you said that. It was 30 years after slavery, after abolishment of slavery, but the conditions were still so bad that they had to revolt. But it was after slavery. But she was one of the queens that led this and used the fire. So
Thank you so much.
And I know also there's been a fire here. I know, so it's also speaking to that. But that's many years ago. But of course, it's completely different. But when I made it, I'm like, oh my God.
Thank you, Jeannette. I would like to move on to another subject now. So we talked about coloniality and space, but I would like also to talk about the diaspora and the idea of sisterhood, particularly in the context of as a black female experience for you, Jeannette Ehlers. So sisterhood, in a general sense, refer to the solidarity and collective unity among women. Historically, this concept has been instrumental in women's movements, enabling them to organize, resist oppression, and strive for social, political, or economical equality. And at the Bicolore, there is your video piece, Diasporic Frequencies, that is just behind you now. Whose choreography you perform was created with your sister, and is also homage to Pearl Primus. So Pearl Primus was a Trinidadian American dancer, choreographer, and anthropologist known for using dance as a means to highlight African cultural heritage. Living on the other side of the Atlantic, your relationship with your sister is also part of the legacy of the Middle Passage, including the loss of family connections as parents, children, and siblings. So yeah, despite this, the bond of sisterhood has remained strong as women have found ways to connect and support one another across time and space. So diasporic frequencies emphasize the importance of solidarity and connection between women for the African diaspora. And the meeting with your personal history, especially your work on disappearance and reappearance, says so much about bonds within the diaspora and our contemporary history. So as an artist and regarding sisterhood, Jeannette, how do you organize your artistic collaborations around the world and engage in your different projects? And I would like maybe you, Elvan, to pick up on this, maybe, if it talks to you.
Thank you. In several of my works, I have, like in my later works, I would say, I have been working with other black female artists or writers. I mean, they're also artists, but people, women. But this particular piece is made in collaboration with my half-sister, who I never met in real life. We only met online, and she's a professor of dance and choreography, and she lives on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. She found me through my art online, and we started talking, and then I was invited to do a project in Copenhagen. It was a project that was initiated and a collaboration between a dance institution and a visual art institution, and I had another project for it, but I'm like, oh no, I have to reorganize, I have to redo everything. So I invited my half-sister to work with me in order for us to get to know each other, but also, as you already mentioned, as an act of solidarity and within the African female politics, body politics, and so she agreed to work with me, even though we had only known each other for maybe 2 months. But I was a little pushy, you know. But she loved it, and she's a bit older than I am, but she's been working, of course, with dance and within the Elvan Zabunyan, and so she's very like professional, of course, and it's been a wonderful experience, and we've both really gained a lot. I mean, love for each other, of course, but also politically, you know, it's like it's an act of politics to do this, and then on top of the video piece, there's a poem by Audre Lorde, At the Edge of Each Other's Battles, and it's actually Audre Lorde herself. When we put the sound back, you can hear it, who recites this poem, and it speaks about how we are in the African diaspora. We are battling, you know, all over the place, but at the core, that's how I understand it. We're all in it in the same way, or we have different battles, but the core is the same. But also in relation to Earth, that is, the colonial system is destroying everything, the Earth, the planet, and, you know, people. So it's like, that's some of the things that for me is really at play. And then also with the Pearl Primus, who you mentioned is a dancer and an anthropologist and activist. And it turns out that my sister actually have been dancing with Pearl Primus's husband. So it's like, wow, this is so crazy. And that is one, I just need to say one more thing, because this is what happens all the time, that it's very much spiritual work. I see all my processes and my work as spiritual work. And then when we did I Am Queen Mary, as I mentioned, it also speaks to the Black Panther Party with Huey P. Newton, who is sitting in the chair in a very iconic image. And it turns out along the way that we actually meet his wife or his widow, and we start collaborating with her. And it's just like coincidence. So it's like it's all linked. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jeannette.
But maybe you have something.
Yes.
I find it very beautiful. So I don't have anything to add in particular. Just the fact that it's incredible that she's also a dancer, you know, and that this, like, the body language, it goes, you know, from anywhere. That this, like, the power of this body language. And I was wondering, because maybe I was not like enough informed and didn't read, but how was your collaboration? I mean, when you said that you haven't met, so what was the way you collaborated?
That's actually quite funny because it's through Zoom. So I ask her to, you know, I tell her my ideas, and she starts, you know, elaborating, and she comes up with her vision and ideas, and then, you know, I would ask her to create a choreography, and then she takes some time, and then after a few days or maybe weeks, she come back and she has everything, and then she shows it on Zoom in her bedroom. And then I'm trying to, you know, I record it, and of course sometimes I'm trying to do the movements, and then I'm recording it, and then I'm just practicing, and then of course it's my interpretation of her, because it's very difficult to do it this way, and she never did it like this before, and I used to dance when I was younger, and I never did it this way before, so it's very, very difficult, but it's also a great challenge.
And also I was wondering how the place you chose, or which was chosen to do this performance, is very specific, and it gives also another power to the place. I mean, to the performance itself.
Exactly.
And the color. I mean, you mentioned earth, and you're wearing like brown clothes, so there's something which goes also, and I probably the walls are brown, you know, there's something which goes also with, in a way, disappearance, because I mean, the way you're wearing everything is at the same tone, on the same tones, so it's just like, you know, grounded, but also, you know, going, and so it's very interesting, because I suppose that when you don't have the lights we have now, it also makes it more, how you call it? Smooth. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it speaks to, I mean, connectivity, both within, I mean, the African diaspora, but also within, like I mentioned before, like all the holistic thinking. But also it has the twist to it with the braids. I mean, they speak to the African diaspora, the linkage and the connectivity, but they of course also speak to the link to colonial history and the violent colonial structures, which also the barn, the structure, of course, speaks to. So it's always like, it's not one thing, it's many things at the same time. And so that's more or less the background. But of course, it's very difficult. I mean, this is the second piece that we work together on, because the first one was the one with the dancing institution, and I was also linked to the building with my braids at that point, but it was in a different environment. But of course, being linked is to a building with your hair really restrain you from doing a lot of movement. I mean, I can only move back and forth. I can't really turn and twist. So it's like, it has been a very great challenge.
Thank you so much, both of you. I saw that it's 8, so I think, I would like to suggest Q&A now, if you have some questions. If we could have a fourth mic for people in the room, please. Thank you.
I think you had a question at some point, or you wanted to say something.
drawing on experience from the French Revolution, but then of course being a new sort of civil war in France, actually, so that which was absolutely very, very powerful. And even in May of 1968, French people drew on political statements from the Paris Commune. So I think that could be another field of investigation, actually, and see the parallels with other parts of the world. So,
but was it inspired by the Haitian Revolution or the French Revolution?
No, it was inspired by the French Revolution,
Okay.
but it was also inspired by the wars, the European wars, and people just had enough. So it actually happened in Paris and then progressed. But it was a civil war and very, very brutal and very, very bloody. So it's something which is not that communicated, you might say, but still very important in French history and European history, in my opinion.
Was it involving the colonial territories, or was it more like local?
No, it was not. It was more local.
It was local, but still, I think you'll find that interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more.
I'm very curious. I have a question. Are you going to see your sister, Jeannette?
Hopefully,
And when,
hopefully, maybe in September when I'm performing in Miami. Yeah, I hope so.
Any more questions?
Nikolai, did you want to say something? No? Yes?
I would like to ask, what was the reaction of the public when they saw the Queen Mary sculpture?
Great question, and thank you for asking. I mean, we had a lot of fantastic support. Actually, she was revealed on one of the coldest days of 2018 in Denmark. It was so cold, but there was a lot of people showing up for it. And we actually had the Black Lives Matter Denmark involved. They really wanted to participate. So there was a big demonstration or march from... actually, Queen Mary was imprisoned in Denmark. She was... sentenced to death, but then instead they made it imprisonment in Denmark. So she was sent to Denmark, and she was imprisoned in what is called the women's prison in something called Christianshavn. And she was there for maybe 5-7 years, and then sent back to the Virgin Islands. However, today that building has a bakery. A very famous bakery. So the Black Lives Matter, they went from that bakery through the city and to the statue. So that was really beautiful. And we had a lot of international, global coverage, press coverage, and a lot of people writing us. We want to see this. We want to come to Denmark. A lot of people came to Denmark to see it, and then we were actually invited to make a smaller version in New York for the Ford Foundation. They invited us to make a small version for a show in New York. And after the show, it was installed in Barnard College, which is a all-female college in New York, and it's still there. And it was first installed in an atrium where sorry, my brain is not working very well at the moment. Where Malcolm X had one of his last speeches. So it's again, and it's still there. And then there's a small version in an institution in Copenhagen, like a very prototype, a small prototype. So we have different people and different institutions supporting us, but we just really need to have for the big one. And we also working on having a sculpture in St. Croix, so we have a sister sculpture, so there's one on each side of the Atlantic. So it's a big project. It takes forever. I guess it takes a long time. I had hoped that it would only take a few years, but now I really realize that it's an ongoing project and it would take a long time. But we have a lot of support, at least mentally and spiritually. So we just need to have the funding, get together, and that is much harder than we thought.
Thank you.
Just another comment, because we were talking last night about a show that you were part of in Copenhagen, which was a show instigated by the French ambassador to Denmark, François Zimret. He had asked the local curator to curate a show about the building where the French embassy is located, about Copenhagen, about different structures. And you had a very beautiful piece in relating to the surrounding buildings that more or less all were built on slavery money. Could you, because I was so happy he came last night, the ambassador, and we had a little talk about that, but it was such a beautiful step into the French world, I think, again. It was actually your first French exhibition, not this one, but actually you have been shown in part of France at the Danish embassy. Could you comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was very happy to be invited to. I mean, I think first of all, it's a beautiful gesture that I don't know if they still do it, but that they opened the embassy for art, and I know that they are very supportive of art in the French embassy in Copenhagen. So, but it was also, I mean, it was also a little tricky how critical can one be inside that space. But I was critical towards the colonial project in a Danish context, but also in a French context. And I created, like you said, something that related to the building and to the square, which is Kongens Nytorv, which is a very colonial space. It was built on money from the, yeah. So I created this huge black, very heavy curtain that was in, yes, blocking the windows. And then I also had a sign. I think it was the Je suis Charlie. Yeah, I had that sign because it was very problematic. So that was a link to today's racism, and of course, I mean, all the what happened, and like, you know, discussing what is really, because a lot of these things draw on the French colonial history with Algeria and stuff like that. And a lot of people don't know that. So there's a lot of things there, and it was like very, you know, but I managed to do it in a subtle way.
Thank you. Is anyone want to ask a last question, maybe?
Thank you for this wonderful talk, first of all. I know Jeanette's work very well. But yeah, I would like to ask Elvan, because I used to live in London for some time, and I was very inspired by the discourse around decoloniality, especially in the arts. And coming here, I feel that it's quite a different climate and environment, and I was wondering what you think about France's and Paris's art scene in terms of evolving the discourse around decoloniality, and also just showing more artists that work with these questions, because I think in comparison to other countries, it's still it's missing a bit in Paris. That's my feeling, but what is yours?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, it's interesting. I think the topicality of certain issues are very much linked to the history of the countries, of the intellectual history of the different countries. Actually, cultural studies were born in the context of UK, thanks to thinkers like Stuart Hall, you know, or even Cobina Mercer, who was first in UK and who after started to teach in the US. British colonial history is also very different than the French colonial history. In UK, or in the British colonial history, which is quite a paradox, but each different culture kept their own integrity. And in the context of the French colonial context, each difference had to be erased. So it means that in the context of France, to emphasize your difference, or the word we use today, diversity, was considered as something not good, because you had to be integrated. This is La République, you know? And this is actually something you still have today. If you express your difference in a way or another, then you can be criticized for expressing this difference. And we were mentioning the context of the colonial, Guadeloupe, for example, with the sculpture. Guadeloupe and Martinique, they are part of France. They are not former colonies. What's going on today in Nouvelle-Calédonie is also a very interesting consequences of the fact that France doesn't accept in a way that these countries could have, or this part of the world could have, their own culture, their own history. What we have today in the context of France with, for example, the fact that you can cover your head when you're a Muslim woman in London, or in New York, any Muslim woman can be a feminist and cover her head. You can have last time I was in London was like in March. The woman working at the ICA in London, she has her head covered. She's a young woman. And it seems that there's no problem. And this was already like this 30 years ago. Because I remembered having attended, when I was still working on my PhD, a very interesting conference in London at the ICA, which was on Frantz Fanon. And Fanon, who is like really a main Martinican and Algerian thinker and psychiatrist, he was at the core of a visual art exhibition in London in 1995. Stuart Hall was invited, Bell Hooks was invited, all this like very, Omi Baba was invited, Isaac Julian was invited, or Steve McQueen was there, René Green was there. There were a lot of artists and thinkers and intellectuals, and it was on Fanon. Exactly at the same time, to buy a book of Fanon in a Parisian bookstore, you had to order the book. You did not. It was not like you cannot get it like this. I remember that I had to order, and the librarian, the man at the bookstore, said he didn't know Fanon. So this is, I think, the difference is also the way you receive this colonial history. And for example, in the context of London, you mentioned London, and the Commonwealth worked in a completely different way, because of course you had the hypocrisy of this colonial history, but at the same time, what happened with the Empire Windrush in 1948, and the fact that also the fact that anyone coming from former colonies could be a British citizen, So this is something which is but being with their differences. And in the context of France, it's very different. And I think, and Jeannette mentioned Algeria, the Algerian independence and the war in Algeria was really like a huge wound in the French history, because it was also, and this is, I know it thanks to my young scholars with whom I worked, art historians. The Musée des Beaux-Arts d'Alger was the equivalent of the Louvre. The most important artworks from the Renaissance time, from the treasures of the French art collections, they were in Alger. And so it was really something important. It meant that Alger was France. Algeria was France, without any difference. So when they lost Alger, and she made this, like Émilie Goudal, she's her name, she's an art historian, and she made a really interesting research on the way when Algeria became independent, they had to save all these Renaissance paintings from the Musée des Beaux-Arts d'Alger to bring them back to France. And this was really a rescue situation for these works they were. And so this is interesting how art and collections and all this. In the context, I think that it will take time also. I mean, I teach for nearly 30 years. Next year it will be 30 years. So my students, I mean, know about these methodologies because it's my issue. So I teach what I do, my research in a way. And so I found quite interesting to see how today you have more and more people interested in these questions in the context of France. And I think that's why also Jeannette is exhibiting today in the context of France, you know, or in Paris. It's not by chance just, it's also because there is a topicality, and the questions she asked in her work are questions I think probably other artists in France need to be aware of or be in contact with. And I think that this connectivity Jeannette mentioned, I think it's very important. And the other issue also important is the issue of language. Today you have more and more books in English which are translated into French, but it took sometimes decades. They were published in English or in the US or in Canada or in UK or in the Anglophone Caribbean, and they would be able, like a lot of people would be able to read, but in the context of France, people usually they don't read much English. Or if I remember having had a discussion with a publisher, and I wanted to have like an important book on post-colonial studies translated into French. And he said, but these issues anyway, those that are interested, they read it in English. We don't need to translate it. But when you see today how important some Bell Hooks, for example, she started to be translated like a couple of years ago. And now the Édition Divergence, they published quite a lot. And you see that also social networks helped a lot, I think. Feminism helped a lot to create this connectivity. And Bell Hooks, for example, today, she's not a mainstream like author, but she is much more, people know who she is. When I started and when I met Bell Hooks in 95, I mean, it was it would have been impossible for me to imagine that she would, in France, that she will have such a, importance like 30 years later. So I think it's also, that's why I think it's a question of topicality. And when before I used to say, friend, in France we are late, but I don't want to speak like this anymore, because I think that each thing comes at a certain moment of time, and then it's not a question to be late, it's just a question that the temporality is different. And then it will take maybe much longer. When you see in the US, this history of slavery I wrote, in the context of the US, everything is very US-centric, for example. And the history of the Caribbean, of Europe, of other parts of the world, they don't know anything about that, So I think it's interesting to create, and that's why art and these traveling exhibitions, traveling artists, and I like very much the word you used, Jeannette, of connectivity, because it's also the diasporic experience is not just linked to African diasporic experience. And today, actually, the word diasporic is used from a lot of different experiences, and even those that are not cultural experiences. So it became a word which we could link to connectivity in a way. So I think it's a very good question, but I think it's important, that's why, to do research and try to understand the context, the different contexts in which books are published, and also university has a big role to play. And it's true that what's going on today with all the anti, gender or anti-post-colonial issues in the context of Europe, and not just of France, of Europe or in the US, is also very much linked to the fact that it took such an importance today, a vivid importance, that people linked to mainstream approaches, they are a little bit frightened, And so in the context of the university, they don't want to lose their power. And so, but if we have artists working or intellectuals or even young students working today, and they want to share their experience as women, as, any, or men, or like trans people, or any kind of, the situation with gender or the diversity, the notion of diversity. But it's not just to have one experience; it's just to share this experience, and that's why probably people living in London, they can be critical of their own context. But when I go to London, I love the way. For example, there's this exhibition at the Royal Art Academy, which is, it's called Entangled Past. And then it's really interesting to think about the fact that they present paintings from the time the Royal Academy was founded, 1768, and trying to understand what was going on at that time. I think that for the moment, France, they didn't reach this point for that. It will take a little bit time, because there's quite a lot of resistance. But it's okay. I mean, we will work for it in a way.
And it's really beautiful, but I just wanted to end by saying the thing that you mentioned around language, because that's exactly, my experience also in Denmark. And especially when I started out working with these issues, there's no language.
Yes.
Everything we know about, the way we can talk about the vocabulary is English, or from the American context, or from the British, because they are more advanced, or they have gone into these issues for a longer time. So that is also one of the things that I and a lot of other people in Denmark, we are trying to present or include in, trying to name and to find a language in a Danish context for this, for these issues, because you need to do that in order to really discuss and in order to really understand what it means. And images can lead a way, and then you can also have, of course, the written words, but it's just a very important dimension to this whole discussion.
Language and translation. I think it's important. Also to the notion of translation, with what goes with translation is also transition. In French we say traduction, but I love the translation because there's a motion in the word itself. No, there's a mobility in the word itself. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elvan. Thank you, Jeannette. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you to you.
Of course.